live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. Thing sucks.
You know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up. You got to pump it up. Don't you know, pump it up.
Well, we're back for another Fan-Led Wednesday. Has it been a week? A week since we were last on?
1 week, yeah.
Yeah, 1 week. Yes, Lydia. She says raining like cats and dogs here. It is, man. Maybe that's part of what I was talking to Trent before we hit the live button here, and it's just I'm not feeling it today. I'm not feeling the excitement, the joy, the energy from the college football season. But it is overcast. It is, kind of a gloomy day. Maybe that's playing a factor in it. Look, Trent, I don't know what to do with these shows anymore, man. We're getting toward the end here. We've got 2 regular season games left this season, and then the potential of Michigan playing a bowl game. I mean, our football schedule here for our shows is dwindling down. We will go down to Just be quiet over there, Matt. Just be quiet. You're just listening today. But the number of shows is going to dwindle down here in the near future. And I think maybe what I'm feeling is what a lot of Michigan football fans are feeling. I had put out the question yesterday, and I just asked fans to share some of their biggest frustrations or disappointments from the 2024 season. And I'm not joking. There were about 1,000 responses in the comments. And, some were expected. I think some were surprising. And so I think I'm just, I'm like you guys. I'm sort of feeling the effects of this is what 5-5 feels like, coming off of the highest of highs to, I don't know, Trent, would you call this the lowest of lows? I don't know that we're there. We're just kind of like in this weird, I don't know. It's not good. It's bad, but it's not like, is it bad? I don't know. How would you classify a 5-5 season like this?
I mean, coming off of a natty, I would say I don't think it's average. Like, it's bad. I don't think you can get any better than bad.
There's no question it's bad, but is this wheels have come off bad? Is this?
No, I don't think we're there yet. Yeah, right. I don't think we're there yet.
So, I mean, that's the thing. And Lydia, she's got it. This is the perfect word for it. It's just blah. Like, it's blah. Like, yes, they're winning some games. They've won the rivalry trophies. You beat Minnesota. You keep the jug. You beat Michigan State, which is, that's light work. You keep Paul Bunyan in Ann Arbor where he belongs. That's light work. And, if you lose those games, obviously you're feeling worse than you're feeling now at 5-5, but it's just a very blah season. And it's hard to get.
It's not that long ago where Michigan beat USC, and it's like, oh, maybe this team figured something out. And
the conversations we were having after that win against USC were downright egregious when I look back at it. I mean, we were talking the potential that Khalil Mullings might be in the Heisman conversation.
Alex Orji, like he could throw, but man, they could use him in the dual threat rule. And
this is what Michigan's all about. You just beat a top-ranked team, yada yada yada, and then obviously, USC turns out to be not very good, and Michigan is. I think every single week Michigan has struggled in some way, shape, or form. Even when they've been able to get the W, Michigan has just struggled. And again, we can get into that later in the show, but it is Wednesday. It is Fan-Led Wednesday. And so we do want you guys to be able to guide the show. So whatever questions you have, whatever topics you have, go ahead and throw them in the comments. You know how it is. We typically get a lot of these things, and then I get behind, and then we forget to not that we forget. We just we don't have enough time to get to them. Once again, Trent is on a time constraint here, so we've got to work with his schedule. But your show, your questions, your comments, your topics. You guys will guide the show, but we'll kick it off here just to get things started. Trent, did you? This became a big topic of conversation on social media yesterday. And once again, it's one of those things that we really can't talk about because Michigan isn't part of the playoff picture. But Trent, did you hear Joey Galloway and his suggestion on what Indiana should do with its quarterback facing Ohio State this weekend? And what were your thoughts there?
No, I saw it, but I don't understand.
So for those who don't know, for those who didn't hear it, Joey Galloway, former Buckeye, by the way, now an analyst for ESPN, suggested that Indiana obviously going to go on the road, face Ohio State this weekend. Huge matchup down in Columbus. And Joey Galloway, former Buckeye, suggested that Indiana should sit their starting quarterback, should bench him for the game, because the risk of him getting injured was too great. And he sort of compared it to what happened with Florida State, right? Florida State lost its starting quarterback. They were undefeated, but because of that, the playoff committee said, you know what, we don't think you're one of the 4 best teams. So Joey Galloway's rationale for this is it's better for Indiana to lose against Ohio State than to risk potentially having their starting quarterback get injured and be left out of the playoff picture altogether. Trent, what are your thoughts on that idea from Galloway?
Egregious, man. I don't know how anybody in their right mind would suggest something like that. You're talking about an Indiana team that has been downright bad in the Big Ten for several years, and finally something clicks. You go get Kirk Cignetti, you go get the former MAC Player of the Year and Curtis Rourke, who has battled injuries. But how could you actually believe yourself to suggest something like that unless you're just searching for viewership or clicks? Like, it just doesn't make any sense that you could actually believe that. But Joey Galloway, he's had plenty of bad takes in the past, and this might trump all those.
I would say so. I mean, yeah, you got an undefeated Indiana team. I mean, if you think Kurt Cignetti is going to sit as starting quarterback for the biggest game of the year for the Hoosiers, I mean, you just don't understand that team. You don't understand that head coach. But it is a bad, very, very bad take. And you could tell all the other guys who were there with him were sort of like, what are you talking about? Like, Reese Davis was beside himself. Who was the other guy there? I forget. He used to play for
was that Palmer?
No, not Palmer. Jesus, who did he was? He was a Bama quarterback.
McElroy.
McElroy was there. I mean, he had his hands on his head. He just, this type of take I think is ridiculous. But Trent, what I do think it speaks to is sort of, does it speak to a bigger point with where we're at with college football, where sometimes you see this in professional sports, right? Where you're getting toward the end of the season. Maybe you've already locked up a spot. You've already qualified for the playoffs. You don't want to injure your starters because you want to make a run at the championship. Do you think that's what Galloway was trying to really get to, is that, hey, this is now a bigger picture thing? Do you think it really speaks to where not just college football is now, but where this whole thing is headed, to where this really is, I mean, look at it as a professional sport, right? If you've clinched the division in the NFL and you're going in the final week of the game, like, are you playing your starting quarterback, or are you potentially going to rest your guys so you can make a run at the Super Bowl?
I mean, sure, but Indiana hasn't clinched anything yet. That's the problem. I mean, if Indiana loses to Ohio State, somehow they lose. I think they play Purdue next week. If somehow they would lose to Purdue in a rivalry game, you're looking at an IU team that might not be making the playoff anymore. So, yeah. I mean, they haven't clinched anything to be thinking about them sitting out any players, especially in a top 5 showdown against Ohio State. Like, that's just not going to happen. Now, if it were Purdue, like they say this game was Purdue, maybe if Curtis Rourke wasn't 100%, you start Taven Jackson and you bring in Rourke if needed. But in this type of environment, this game, there's no way that Cignetti or anybody on that staff is thinking about benching their star quarterback.
No, dumb take from a former Buckeye. And again, he's a former Buckeye. He wants to see Ohio State win. So I'm not surprised that one of his suggestions would be, well, Indiana should just bench their starting quarterback. I mean, it's a bad take, but I do think it speaks to where college football is at. Because if this were the BCS era, if you did take the playoffs out of it, like, nobody's making that type of suggestion going into a game like this. Like, this is what you play for. This is why you're in that spot. So just a weird and wild take. But again, I mean, former Buckeye, what should you expect there? Let's start to get to some of the fan questions here. Marty Moga from the Facebook page. He says, my question is, did our coaches think we had a serviceable quarterback last winter/summer? Trent, I'll pass that to you. The quarterback issue has obviously been a big talking point with this football team. Fans, they're really questioning Sherrone Moore's decision to not dip into the transfer portal. And he seemed to indicate during the offseason that he felt confident about what Michigan had. So I guess the question is, do you take them at their word? Do you think they felt that they had a serviceable quarterback, or do you think that maybe they had attempted to get something out of the portal and it didn't work out, so you had to save face by saying you liked what you had when maybe that wasn't the case?
Well, I mean, if you listen to the coaches, even back in June and July, back in the springtime too, Kirk Campbell seemed very confident in every single quarterback in his room. Sharon Moore, like you said, he said a couple different times that Michigan had multiple guys who could start for them this season. I mean, I want to believe that they believe that one of these guys could really step up and be the starter. I also have to think that Michigan did some talking to guys in the portal to bring in maybe that veteran who started other places, and it just didn't pan out. And there were a lot of guys who were already committed. We've talked about this. There were other guys who were committed to other teams at that point in time when Sharon Moore took over as head coach, where it didn't ultimately work out. But I mean, man, obviously watching the season unfold, it's pretty clear that Michigan didn't have that guy, but I got to believe that the coaches at that point in time thought they did.
Either that or they were lying. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It certainly seemed like there was a high level of confidence that Michigan had the pieces necessary. And I think that we've talked about this before, and I don't think anybody knows for certain what went into the line of thinking, but to me, it seemed pretty clear that the belief was that whether it be Jack Tuttle, whether it be Davis Warren, that you had a veteran quarterback who could sort of serve that Cade McNamara-like role. We've talked about that before.
What happens if we went out, huh?
That guy, remember him in 2021, led Michigan to a win over Ohio State Big Ten championship. But again, his role was game manager. And I think that Sharon Moore, even though they probably made some attempts to get some guys out of the portal, by the time Sharon Moore took over, it was like you look at the options in the portal, you try to figure out who's interested, you look at who you got, and there you've got seventh-year veteran Jack Tuttle, you've got Davis Warren, you've got some guys that have been in the system for a while, and you probably think, hey, these guys can float us for a year. We're going to have veterans on the offensive line. We got Donovan Edwards coming back. We've got some serviceable guys at wide receiver, and we've got a defense full of, by the way, you got Colson Loveland there at tight end, and you got a defense full of, potential first-round draft picks. You probably thought that what you had would be good enough to float you for a year while Jaden Davis developed. And I think once they got into the season, Jack Tuttle, obviously the injuries, became too great to overcome. He did get his opportunities here, but he was just bad. And Davis Warren got off to a shaky start. Didn't really have much there with Alex Orji. So, I mean, it is a fair question, to ask, how did they not know this? And it was brought up on previous shows before where, Trent, it might just be the result of, we've seen what this secondary looks like against the pass. It might have been just a situation where, the Michigan quarterbacks were carving up the Michigan secondary in spring session and in fall camp. And maybe it gave you a false sense of like, our guys can get it done. They didn't know that the Michigan secondary was going to be as bad as it was, and they have struggled mightily against the pass all season long. How much of that do you think maybe played a factor in, I guess, thinking they had more at quarterback than what they really had?
Well, I do. I've said it before, and I keep going back to those times in the summer where we would get Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, and they would say, the offense, man, they keep getting us, and then we go back and get them, and then the offense comes back and beats us. It's like, after you watch the season come and go, I don't know, man. I definitely think that, I feel like that was very plausible that the Michigan offense, the quarterbacks, were beating this Michigan defense in practice time, where it gave you that false sense of hope that maybe Michigan really did have something more.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's got to play a part in it. These guys, even though Sharon Moore is a first-year head coach, he's been an OC for now. He was co-OC, then the OC, so he's had that role for a couple of years. Kirk Campbell, obviously quarterbacks coach, he spends a lot of time with these guys. It's weird to me that they wouldn't know that they had some issues at quarterback. And so the only way that I can try to make sense of it is they watched these guys go out and perform against the Michigan defense, and it gave them a false sense of security. We expected the secondary to be good. Even with the loss of Rod Moore, we thought they were going to be serviceable. And then obviously with the front four and the linebackers, we thought that this Michigan defense was going to be way better than it's been. And so I think when you put the offense out there against that defensive unit, maybe you think you're better offensively than you really are. And we've seen that played out throughout the course of the season. Tyrone from the Facebook page, he asks, did it take a season like this to get off our NIL butts? Trent, what do you think? Did it take a 5-5 season like this to really get Michigan? I mean, we've seen the reports now, and there's some sort of debate back and forth as to what the numbers are when it comes to a guy like Bryce Wood in particular. But did it take a season like this for Michigan to really get off their ass and say, all right, we got to start playing this game?
100%. 100% I believe it. I mean, Jim Harbaugh has been the one saying for several years now that you come to Michigan, it's more for a transformational approach, not transactional. But we see all these big time colleges like Alabama and your Oregons and your Ohio States. They're not afraid to offer the money. Texas. And today's college football, if you don't have an A++ staff to develop the players, you've got to go get the big fish. You have to go compete with the other schools to land the talent, to land those 5-star recruits. And I think that this is what it took for Michigan to play the games. It took this for all the donors to realize, hey, if we want Michigan to win more national championships, to win more Big Ten titles, then we have to help Michigan play this game. And that's exactly what's happening. And I fully believe, yes, it took this type of a season for Michigan to get it in gear.
Yeah, and it's something that I've talked about. I mean, geez, going all the way back to the 2021 season, the NIL thing and sort of, Michigan having, this alumni base, this wealthy alumni base and all these donors and all of these resources with the potential that it could have been one of the top players in the NIL game. But Michigan's, transformational over transactional approach, I think it really, scared some donors off. And I think that Ward Manuel talked about that. He was speaking. I can't remember who he was talking to, but he said flat out, keep in mind, if you're the athletic director, if you're even Sharon Moore, like a big part of your job right now is fundraising, is going out and getting dollars for NIL. Like that is a big part of your job. And Ward Manuel flat out said, like, donors were turned off. They were scared by it. And oh, by the way, we were also now under NCAA investigation. So we didn't really want to stretch the limits too much with NIL. And I think they've reached a point now where when you're 5-5 on the season and you see other, you go down to Texas and you see Lamborghinis rolled out for the recruits. And I don't know what that means. Are they actually getting them, or are you just parking these cars out in front? I think they do have some sort of sponsorship or deal with Lamborghinis. I think a couple guys have them, but you see those things going on. You see guys signing NIL deals with private jet companies and things like that. And you're wondering, why isn't Ann Arbor doing the same thing? And then I think when you look at the Bryce Underwood recruitment in particular, they are now at a place where post Jim Harbaugh era, they understand that if they want to continue to compete, they're going to have to play that game. And I think this season, yes, to your point, Tyrone, this is a big wake-up call. And it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show. 5-5 is not fun. People are not excited about this. Donors don't want to pay for a product like this. So there has to be a sense of urgency in Ann Arbor right now for this football program that, look, that's why I think you're seeing the type of money being thrown reportedly at a guy like Bryce Underwood. They understand the sense of urgency. You cannot have another season like this. And so in order to get things back on track, yeah, you're going to have to play the NIL game. And I think that Tyrone, to your question, yeah, it took a season like this to really shake some folks and wake people up and say, look, we can't have this happen again.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if Michigan, let's just say Michigan was, let's say they went 9-3 or 10-2. I firmly believe that you're looking at the same approach. I think that Sharon will and would have been a better recruiter than Jim Harbaugh, just for the fact that he's not going anywhere. You have to worry about Jim Harbaugh leaving for the NFL every single year, which could turn away some of those star guys. Where if Michigan was 9-3 or 10-2, I think you continue to see the same approach. However, I think you see a little bit better talent coming in, just because you have a younger guy here in Ann Arbor that's going to stay there. Yeah,
I mean, that's fair. You got to wonder if Michigan is, I don't know, instead of 5-5, if they're 8-2 right now, if they're 9-1 right now, do you think there's still a potential $10 million offer out there for a guy like Bryce Underwood? Or do you think what's happened this year is playing a role in the fact that, hey, we're willing to pay that? We understand. We get it now. We need an elite quarterback here at Michigan. How much do you think 5-5 is playing a role in that reported $10 million offer?
Yeah, I think a lot. I mean, I'm not saying that Michigan wouldn't be a little bit into the NIL game, especially since Sharon Moore's here. I think that's something that he wanted to do, but I don't know that you'd be seeing or hearing about a $10.5, $11 million offer to one player. Like, I just don't think that it would have happened. I don't think because ultimately, I don't think the donors would have been on board with it as much. If Michigan's still competing for a chance at a playoff, a Big Ten championship, I just don't think that they would be into it like they are now, trying to get this program back to where it needs to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be big motivators when it comes to NIL, but I think losing is probably the biggest motivator, and that's what you're seeing happen right now at Michigan. So hopefully it's going to lead to some good things. It seems like, look, for as much as they're struggling on the field on Saturdays, it doesn't seem to be translating over to the recruiting trail. I know Michigan has lost a couple of guys here in recent weeks, but it looks like, and it sounds like, and I mean, we're on Recruit Watch right now. It sounds like Michigan's set to bring in another big-time recruit. And so Sharon Moore and his staff, they're continuing to do well on the recruiting trail. If you can add a guy like a Bryce Underwood or get another top-flight quarterback, I know that they were looking at the kid who's committed to Maryland. He's been committed to Maryland since, I think, over the summer. But Michigan right now, they're playing the game. They're doing well on the recruiting trail, and it stands to reason that, when you look at the way things are playing out, this should be a blip on the radar for Sharon Moore. I don't think that this 5-5 season is indicative of what we can expect with him leading the way. But it's not just going to come with roster changes, and we've talked about this before. I think you're going to need to make some significant changes on the coaching staff as well. Yep. CJ Frazier from the Facebook page, he says, if you were Coach Moore, would you consider starting Jaden Davis this week? Trent, I'll throw it to you first. Would you consider starting the true freshman this week against Northwestern?
I know that fans laugh about becoming bowl eligible, especially after winning the national championship last week. But regardless, I mean, I think it's important.
You said winning the national championship last week.
Last
it
year.
Feel like last week.
Actually, They didn't lose, so it kind of was. But I mean, I know the fans laugh about it, but I think it is important, especially if you want to get your young guys more reps, more practice time, your Benjamin Halls, those type of players. So I think you got to do whatever you can to win this week against Northwestern to become bowl eligible, to get into that bowl game, because likely you're not beating Ohio State. So you're looking at a 6-6 season here. So I think if you're Michigan, you have to do whatever you can do to win this game, which means Davis Warren. Now, if you could somehow get off to a big lead, then yeah, I mean, I think you should try to play Jaden Davis a little bit. Start him though? I don't think so, because there's a reason why he hasn't played yet. I know Chris and I both have been on we need to see what Jaden Davis can do train, but at the same time, I keep going back to he's not playing because he's not ready. I mean, he's past his redshirt limit. He can play the rest of the games in redshirt. So clearly that's not the problem. It's because he's just not ready to play yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think starting him is 100% out of the question, CJ. And I agree with Trent. I think that, regardless of how much you buy into this idea that there was some sort of promise made, I do think if Jaden Davis was the best quarterback option for Michigan this year, or if at any point in time Jaden Davis became the best option at quarterback this year, and they didn't play him strictly because of a promise that was made, I think that's a real problem. And that's a real conversation. That's a different conversation than I think we're going to have here today. I think it probably comes down to the fact, to Trent's point, that he just isn't ready. And we've heard early on that he needed to work on his mechanics. There were a lot of development things that needed to take place, which is a little bit strange for a guy who was a borderline 5-star prospect, that, to view him as so much of a developmental prospect, and for guys to also view him as like this fragile. We've talked about this before. Like you can't put him out there. You're going to damage him. You're going to hurt him. It's like he's older than Aiden Childs, and he's been with the program since last December. He went through the championship practice. He was there with the Rose Bowl. He was there for the national championship. He's been in the program now for a little while. But I think Trent's correct. I think that there's some things that he needs to work on that are holding him back. And I think that, for better or worse, Davis Warren, at least right now, is the best quarterback option on this roster. Now, with that all being said, I do think that if Michigan gets a comfortable lead, because making a bowl game, even as a fan, if you don't give a shit, for this team and for Sharon Moore, it's important that they qualify for a bowl game. But if Michigan gets a comfortable lead, yeah, I would like to see the true freshman out there rather than see Alex Orji come in bits and spurts here. Or like, what are you going to do now that Jack Tuttle's out of the fold? I mean, I think this is a fair question here, Trent. With Jack Tuttle out of the fold, and with Alex Orji now going back to his traditional role as purely a running quarterback, if Michigan does go up, I don't know, let's say something crazy happens against Northwestern and it's 35-3 in the fourth quarter, who do you go to? Do you keep playing Davis Warren? Do you bring in Alex Orji just to hammer it away and run it with him? Or do you give the true freshman a look, knowing that you're not going to burn his red shirt? You got a comfortable lead, and you can sort of work him in on a fall Saturday.
Ultimately, I believe Michigan would go with Alex Orji. Me, myself, if I'm coaching, no, if you have a sizable lead, it's in the third or fourth quarter, play Jaden Davis. Give him some live reps, see what he can do, let him throw the ball a few times, don't just hand it off, and see what he can do in a Big Ten action. Like, I know it's Northwestern, but they're still a Big Ten school. See what he can do, see what he's capable of, because obviously, if you don't go get Bryce Underwood, then you have to go out and get a big-time transfer portal guy, at least one. So see what you have in Jaden Davis. See if he can even compete for the starting job next season, because a lot is riding on next season. That is for sure.
Yeah, there's no question about it. That's what, that's such a big talking point, is trying to figure out what you have at quarterback next year and where Jaden Davis fits into that fold. And honestly, man, there's a lot of people, like, right or wrong, there's a lot of people who think that the fact that we haven't seen him at all kind of gives you an indication of where he is and what Michigan's going to do during the offseason in terms of the transfer portal. I mean, if you don't land a guy like Bryce Underwood, who could be your true freshman starter, I don't think there's any question at this point that Michigan's going to go into the transfer portal looking for their starting quarterback next season.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just say Jaden Davis comes in, he looks good, right? Let's just say he does, and you don't get Bryce Underwood. I still think you have to go get a Miller Moss or somebody like that and let those two compete for it. Like, I don't think you want to put all of your chips in Jaden Davis's basket and hopes that he turns out to be really good. Because what if he isn't? Like, what if we see the same stuff that we see this season? He's turnover prone. He's just not ready. Then you're looking at the same exact results in 2025. So I think regardless, Michigan has to go into the portal and land somebody that's talented that could start.
Agreed. Marlon from the Facebook page, he says, there's no way when Sharon Moore looks back at the year and finds an excuse other than horrible play calling for the offensive side, at least. So I think what he's really saying is, at the end of the year, when Sharon Moore looks back and takes stock at everything that happened, this is a question that you and I have asked ourselves quite a bit. Do you see any scenario where Sharon Moore does look back at this year and finds a way to justify bringing back Kurt Campbell as his offensive coordinator?
I mean, obviously there's the human side of things, and Sharon Moore clearly likes Kurt Campbell. They were just in Florida last weekend together watching Brady Hart and then offering a couple kids down there. So, I mean, they're obviously working together still in the recruiting part of things, but if you just look at the tape and watch how Michigan's offense has performed this season, the weird calls that are called, I don't see how you can, in your right mind, bring Kurt Campbell back as the offensive coordinator. I mean, you and I have talked about his recruiting side of things. I mean, if he accepts a demotion, you can keep him on staff, but I don't know how you could think that bringing him back as your OC is a good move.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They just offensively, I don't know what you can point to unless if you're Sharon Moore, you're looking at the offense and you're saying what Kurt Campbell wanted to do would have worked if we had the right pieces in place. But I think as a coach, isn't that an indictment on you? Like, you didn't have the right guys. They weren't coached up. They couldn't do the things you were asking them to do. I think that's why people are looking at this year and still wanting to shovel some of that on Jim Harbaugh and what was left behind and sort of what they had to work with. But that's not going to work next year. And if we see the same struggles with Kurt Campbell as the offensive coordinator, the same questionable play calling, the same substitution issues, the same just like head scratching, puzzling things that, these types of mistakes you shouldn't be making at this level. That's all, people can point the firing squad at Kurt Campbell right now, but if it happens next year, it's going to be pointed directly at Sharon Moore because it's 100% his decision on who he chooses to bring back in those roles for 2025. So that's going to be that is going to be one of the most interesting aspects of this offseason. Yeah, we want to see what happens with the roster and in the transfer portal in particular, but really curious to see what Sharon Moore does with his coaching staff. And we know that, look, there's some guys out there that have recently lost their head coaching jobs elsewhere. Some have a history with Michigan. Some have history of success as offensive coordinators. There are some options out there. Is Sharon Moore making those calls, having those conversations? I'd be shocked if he wasn't looking into bringing Biff back to Michigan, just given the history there and sort of what he meant to the program when he was here.
Chris, he actually just announced on social media a few minutes ago that he will be in Ann Arbor this weekend with Sharon Moore.
Well, there you go. So I think you can pretty much bank on the fact that Biff's coming back to Ann Arbor, right? It just feels like as soon as you heard that, you could see it on social media. There were people advocating for it. You know, he was Harbaugh's right-hand man during his time that was here. I think he wasn't the associate head coach during his time at Michigan. So obviously he was highly thought of among the coaches and the players. He's a culture guy. He's just a guy that people love. He's that type of like, yes, he wants to coach you up, but he also cares about you as a person type guy, good on the recruiting trail. And so I think that that's a move that makes a lot of sense for Sharon Moore. What that means in terms of what role he will play on the staff, I'm not exactly sure. But again, seeing what Sharon Moore decides to do with this coaching staff in the offseason, I think is going to be really interesting to watch.
To me, I mean, obviously you want to see how Michigan fills out its roster, but I'm more intrigued what Sharon Moore does with his coaching staff. Like, yeah, who doesn't he bring back? Who does he go out and get? To me, that's even more intriguing than if Michigan, what they do at quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the quarterback thing has been such a pain in the ass this whole year. Like, I am very curious what they're going to do there because we don't know about Jaden Davis and we're not sure who that guy is. Who is it going to be in the transfer portal that Michigan ends up getting, or if a Bryce Underwood is going to be in the fold. So I'm intrigued by that because I think that, you know, even with this current coaching staff, if Michigan had an elite quarterback, I think you probably are at, 7-8 wins at this point in the season. So it just goes to show how critical that position is. But yeah, coaching staff and play calling, that's certainly a big part of it as well. So just a lot to keep your eye on during the offseason. I don't really see a lot of questions here. I see Bob asking why. I'll throw this one up here. Bob from the Facebook page says, why wasn't Mike Hart brought back? Our running backs room went downhill. I'm not going to pretend to know all the ins and outs of the Mike Hart situation. The last I knew, I believe he walked away for personal reasons. And I think that nobody really elaborated on it beyond that. And you obviously don't want to speculate, but that was my understanding. Trent, have you heard anything additional beyond that when it comes to Mike Hart and why he didn't come back?
No, I'm right there with you. I don't think it was the fact that Michigan let him go. I think that he walked on his own for personal reasons, and he's not in coaching. Like, he's not coaching anywhere right now. He's not even active on his social media anymore. So something personal is going on with Mike Hart. And obviously, if he ever wanted to come back to Michigan, I'm sure he would be welcomed back with open arms. Everyone liked Mike Hart, and he did a great job here. So whatever is going on with Mike, I'm sure if he wants to come back, he would be welcome.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold the whole getting off of social media or not using it. I want to get off of social media. This shit is toxic, dude. I feel like I need to take like 2 weeks off and just detox from it. Constantly staring at a screen, constantly updating news feeds. It's just it's the world that we live in now. Let me see here. I see a couple more questions coming in. If you could pick top of. Ooh, this is
CJ.
good.
I would need some time to think about that one.
Well, but he's just asking, if you could get one or the other, regardless of what the name is.
Oh, I thought he was asking who.
No,
okay,
so CJ's question. This is a good one, CJ. This is why we love you here. He says, if you could pick, would you choose to take the top offensive play caller in the country or the top quarterback recruit in the country? Trent, if you had two buttons sitting in front of you heading into 2025. Are you pressing the button to get the top offensive play caller, or are you pressing the button to bring Bryce Underwood to Michigan?
Play caller all the way. Give me a competent play caller in Ann Arbor, because I think you can go to the portal and bring somebody in. You could go get a Miller Moss or whoever enters the portal after the season. You can fill those needs. But let's just say Bryce Underwood comes to Michigan and you keep Kurt Campbell. Are we sure that Michigan is going to be all that much better if from what we've seen this season out of Kurt Campbell, because I don't know that they will be. So go give me whoever that is, the top play caller in all of college football, to come in, because I think you can make an average team good just by what you can do with the scheme.
I think I'm going to cheat a little bit. I would take Bryce Underwood, obviously the top quarterback recruit in the country, and then I would take the second best offensive play caller in the country. Can I do that? Is that fair? That's fair. I can do that. You never said I couldn't do that.
That's ridiculous.
No. I would take Bryce Underwood, who is clearly the top quarterback recruit in the country, and then I would go out and find somebody who's really, really, really good as an offensive coordinator, who's been experienced, who's played, had success in that role. Yes,
CJ shot it down.
No,
his question, his rules.
Listen, my show, my rules. That's how it works. But yeah, no, I mean, look, we've seen. I've said it before. I've talked about it a number of times. Trent, you and I have talked about it a number of times. Just how much coaching can really, you see it on paper from week to week. Michigan has the most talented roster, outside of Texas and, maybe Oregon. But Michigan has had a more talented roster than, I would argue, than Washington, than Illinois. Could maybe, I don't know, can you even argue Indiana at this point? I mean, on paper, if you're looking at it strictly on paper, Michigan has
a better team than Indiana.
Michigan has the better roster. But we've seen time and time again, week after week, how important good coaching is. And so, yeah, I mean, if you can get the top play caller in the country to come in here and work this Michigan offense, I mean, I do think that's the difference between 5-5 and 7-3 or 8-2 or, being in the playoff hunt right now is it seems to be coaching. I don't think Michigan has a roster issue. As much as you want to point to, the quarterback issues and maybe some of the struggles we've seen with Donovan Edwards or some of the struggles that we've seen in the secondary, ultimately, I think it all boils down to coaching. And I think if you've got a better coaching staff in place, I'm not putting it all on Sharon Moore, but he is a first-year head coach and he does lack experience. And I think because of that, it's even more critical that you surround yourself with people who have a ton of experience at this level and have had success at this level. Instead, what he got was Kurt Campbell, who has virtually no experience as an offensive coordinator, and Wink Martindale, who hasn't coached in college in 20 years.
Yeah.
That's his right and left hand guy. So that to me is why you've seen some of the things play out you've seen on Saturdays, because it's not that those guys aren't good, but they're not the best of the best. They're not the elite. They're not the guys who have a proven track record of success at this level. And I think if you're a first-year head coach, that's what you need.
Yeah, I agree. Essentially, Sharon Moore is learning on the job as a first-year head coach. So like we've talked about before, you have to have the best possible staff around yourself. And everyone's learning on the job at Michigan right now. Other than you could make an argument for Brian Jean-Marie, the linebackers coach. He's been around for a while. Yeah. But I mean, everybody is basically learning on the job at Michigan this year, and you can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, learning on the job looks like 5-5. That's what it looks like. Lance from the Facebook page, he says, "What do you think about the new 7-figure passes deal?" For anybody who doesn't know what that is, so Passes is a company that has partnered with the University of Michigan for an NIL deal. It is another one of those, if you're a fan, subscription based, you basically pay to get exclusive content, insight from the players. I think you have the opportunity to maybe get some unique apparel, things like that. But the more important part of the Passes deal with the University of Michigan is the fact that they've invested 7 figures, I think, to have the right to use things like the Block M. They're working through Learfield, who controls basically all the media rights to the Michigan stuff. But that's the big part of this. And so what I think about it is, from a fan standpoint, I don't think fans are going to be really turned on by having another, subscription-based thing in front of them where it's okay, I can sign on and I can pay monthly for this and I can get the behind the scenes from Coach Moore and behind the scenes from this, or I can get exclusive access to various things. I think the bigger part of that is the 7 figures they're paying to Learfield and what that's going to do from an NIL standpoint. And there's no question that type of deal is playing a role in being able to offer a kid like Bryce Underwood reportedly $10 million over the course of 4 years. And so I think they're pulling that money from different sources. But I think that this is one of the things where, look, if you're a company, You're not just going to come in and give up 7 figures just for the hell of it because you feel like it's a business, right? You want a return on that. And the way that a company like Passes is going to try to get a return on that is by having fans sign up for subscriptions and pay monthly for exclusive content. So that aspect of it, I'm not a huge fan of. We'll see what they offer. And maybe it's more in depth and more interesting than what I'm giving it credit for. But ultimately, I think the big deal with that deal is the 7 figures up front, which is going to go to secure. If it ain't going to be Bryce Underwood, and Trent, I believe this wholeheartedly, even if Michigan doesn't get Bryce Underwood, they're going to get a top quarterback this offseason. They are going to get a legit QB this offseason. Michigan has proven that they're willing to pay for a guy if they want him bad enough. So if you're a quarterback who's out there, highly rated quarterback, you've been at your program now for a couple of years, you're sort of looking at Michigan like they might not have a quarterback next year. Like I can go there. I don't know if I'm going to get the $10 million Bryce Underwood deal, but I can get a big time deal. I think one way or another, because Michigan has flexed its muscle through NIL and through deals like what you're seeing with Passes, one way or another this offseason, they're going to sign a top flight quarterback. But I do have this question for you, Trent. And somebody asked this, and I thought that this was an interesting way to discuss it. Do you think, regardless of whether or not how accurate it is, I mean, we know that, is it safe to say that the NIL deal being offered from Michigan to Bryce Underwood is in the millions? Safe to say.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly what the number is, but it's in the millions. If you are another top quarterback and Michigan has set the bar that high for Bryce Underwood, don't you think that sort of sets the expectation that, hey, if I'm a 5-star quarterback, I'm the top quarterback in the country, like I want 10 mil. You were going to give it to Bryce Underwood? I want 10 mil. Like, do you think maybe they've gone so far in on Bryce Underwood and the number is so high that it could work against them with other quarterbacks who are going to look? I mean, hell, if you're a Jaden Davis saying like, they didn't give me $10 million, you know what I mean? Like, could it work against Michigan?
Could it? Yeah. Will it? I don't know. At the end of the day, you're talking about the top ranked recruit in all of college football. I get what you're saying though. Let's just say a 5-star recruit is getting offered $4 million from Ohio State. Just making up a number. Michigan comes in, hey, we'll give you $4.5 million. Well, it's not $10 million, but it's more money than what you were getting in another school. So I think there's still that bidding process where it's not going to automatically go up to $10 million. Like you're talking about a special prospect here. You're not just talking about any player in college football or in high school. So yeah, could it affect Michigan down the road? Sure. But I don't think it will, just for the fact of you're bidding against other teams and not everyone's going to offer $10 million for a prospect.
Yeah, I mean, you are what the market value is. And I think that if you're expecting 10 million from Michigan and, a program like Ohio State is only offering you 2 or 3, like I think Michigan's going to come down and they're going to say, okay, well, we'll offer you 2 or 3 and you can come play at the University of Michigan. So I really think it's a good point. And I agree. I think overall it's showing what Michigan is willing to do if they see that, we think this guy is the future. We think this guy could be the type of guy that could be a program changing guy. We're willing to do that. We can flex that NIL muscle. But it is going to be interesting because, people have egos involved. And I'm sure that, again, if you are a Jaden, we know what happened with Carter Smith, right? Carter Smith was part of the 2025 class. He saw what was going on with the recruitment of Bryce Underwood and he said, screw this, I'm out. And it looks like he might be going down to Florida State now. I don't know that he's actually committed. He took a visit to Wisconsin, looked like he might be, favored to go to Wisconsin. Now Florida State is sort of leading in his recruitment, but that did cost them their only quarterback in the 2025 class. So right now, Michigan is without a quarterback in the 2025 class. Is it going to come on the recruiting trail? Are they going to supplement it via the transfer portal? That's something that we're obviously going to find out in the coming weeks. CJ Frazier is just coming with the heaters today. He says, we say this again, CJ from the Facebook page. He says, we say Moore is learning on the job. Did we give him too much credit for the games he coached last year? I think that's interesting because we are looking at Sharon Moore as sort of, geez, man, like he's making the mistakes of a first-year head coach. Like this isn't really what we expected. And then you look at what it looked like when he was coaching in the games last year. And yeah, there were some like all of the runs against Penn State, like, was that ideal? No, but the fact that they could do it, it was like, all right, cool, do it. And it was fun to talk about, but I don't know that that was creative play calling. That was just sort of, this is what's working. This is what we're going to keep doing sort of thing. But Trent, do you think we did give Sharon Moore maybe too much credit for the success he had in stepping in for Jim Harbaugh in those 4 games last season?
I mean, to say that he didn't deserve a lot of credit, I think would be wrong, because he still had to go out and execute and call the plays, and he had a lot on his shoulders during those games. On top of being the acting head coach, you had to deal with all the NCAA bull crap, and there was all kinds of stuff going on behind the scenes that Sharon Moore had to deal with. But I mean, obviously, that was Jim Harbaugh's team. He had his hand in the game plan for the entire week. I wouldn't doubt that Sharon Moore and Jim Harbaugh talked during halftime of the games. Like, I wouldn't rule that out whatsoever. I don't know that, I'm speculating, but it wouldn't surprise me. So obviously that, and on top of that, you're talking about the players that were on those Michigan teams. JJ McCarthy, Blake Corum, and all those guys were on those teams. But does Sharon Moore deserve credit? Absolutely. He still had to go out there and execute it and get the job done, make the tough calls, and he did it flying colors. Like, he was awesome. So to give him no credit whatsoever, I think would be wrong. But yeah, I mean, when you step back and look at the whole picture of things, it was Jim Harbaugh's team.
Yeah, and I mean, even though Jim Harbaugh was suspended and he wasn't there on the sidelines, he was still there during practice. He was still meeting with the team. Like, his fingerprints, going through the game planning, still had Jesse Minter there, still, like, there were a lot of things that I think were working. Still had Ben Herbert in the building and on the sideline. Like, you're talking about key aspects of what made this football team special. And so without, how do I want to say this? I feel like I try to do this all the time without trying to sound like I'm disparaging Sharon Moore. Yeah, I would say that maybe to an extent, he got a little too much credit, or maybe fans just thought a little bit too much of what he was doing when you consider all of the pieces he had around him. And that's what Trent was talking about, not just on the roster, but look at what Jesse Minter's doing in the NFL right now with his defense. Look at what Jim Harbaugh's doing with the Chargers, Ben Herbert, like all of those guys are so critical to what was happening. Yeah, you didn't have Jim Harbaugh on Saturdays, but you had all those other weapons around you. And I think that those guys also played a massive role in why Michigan was able to not skip a beat. But you got to give Sharon Moore credit for stepping into the role and coming out undefeated. I mean, leading Michigan to a win over Ohio State, leading Michigan to a win on the road in Happy Valley against Penn State. Like, those are big time wins. And I think that gave people confidence that Sharon Moore could do the job if and when Jim Harbaugh decided to walk away. But did we maybe overestimate or overvalue Sharon Moore as a head coach and what he would be able to do in his first year without any of the support staff that Jim Harbaugh put in place? Yeah, I think a lot of us are probably guilty of that. And we're seeing that happen on Saturday. Doesn't mean he can't turn it around. Doesn't mean he won't be a phenomenal coach at the University of Michigan and achieve a lot of success. It just means that I think a lot of us had to come back down to reality and maybe put into perspective just how elite all of the pieces were in 2023. This was a unique, damn near once in a lifetime type squad from top to bottom, from roster to coaching staff. And you just don't get that all the time. And I think that's what makes those runs so special. We've talked about that before, but great question, CJ.
Yeah, that was a really good question. And CJ said it later on, like, he probably got even more credit because he beat Penn State at Penn State. Then you beat Maryland, and then you beat Ohio State. It's the quality of opponents that he led Michigan to beat, which, if you're talking about Bowling Green and Rutgers and those type of schools, he wouldn't have got as much credit. But when you go to State College and you beat Penn State the way they beat Penn State, you escape Maryland, and then you beat Ohio State, like, you're going to get showered with credit because, well, you were the acting head coach, and all the turmoil going on in Ann Arbor, like, it was warranted.
Yeah. Trent, you want to take this one from the YouTube page? Michigan recruit 5. The question is, what do you think EJ Holland, he's the recruiting guy for On3.
Yeah.
Right. He says, what do you think EJ Holland and all the numbers he's reporting and basically, or what do you think of it? and all the numbers he's reporting and basically pissing off the Underwood camp. So Trent, what do you think about all this reporting coming from On3 about the 10.5 million and some of the recruiting insider stuff? What do you think, Trent?
I mean, I've heard the same thing, that the Underwood camp wasn't happy with the numbers being revealed. But I mean, that's part of the game now. If those numbers get back to these guys, like, they're going to report it. I mean, whether you want them to or not. So it's just, the only thing I have to say is it's part of the new game. Like, if NIL is involved and you're in a bidding war, between LSU and Michigan, like, numbers are going to come out. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. I think I am just going to bite my tongue on that stuff. I feel like I could really.
I didn't know I had that option.
Well, you didn't. I didn't give you that option. Okay. I'll just say this. And it's not just with one outlet or one particular person. I think that recruiting insiders in general in this market are extremely immature and do not know how to handle themselves on social media. I think they are a bad representation of the University of Michigan. And I think a lot of those guys, and some of them are actually old, but I think a lot of them still have a lot of growing up to do when you see the way they interact with each other on social media. So that's all I'm going to say about that thing. In terms of the reporting and the numbers, like, Trent's right. Like, that's just the world we live in right now. And if something gets leaked and somebody's hearing something from someone, that's the nature of the beast. And that's basically, you're going to report that. Like, you have an obligation to report that. Again, we don't, as much as sometimes it seems like it, we don't work for the University of Michigan. We're not employed by the University of Michigan. Like, when you look at an On3 or a 247 or an On SI or whatever it is, like, the job is to report what it is you're hearing. And obviously, you want to check your sources. And that's part of the reason why I don't want to be an insider. Like, I've never even attempted to do that. I don't ask anybody questions because I don't want to know the answers. I'll wait until somebody else reports it, and they can die on that hill if they want. But that, to me, is just a difficult world. And I think if you want to be successful in that world and you want to be respected in that world, I think you got to carry yourself a certain way. And I think that, the way that we have seen that in this market in particular has been disappointing. Like I said, I just think there's a lot of growing up to do with those folks in all aspects.
Yep.
Look, I said I wasn't going to say anything, then I ended up saying shit. So let's see here. Oh, CJ. You know what, CJ? I think you've used up all your Chucky credits here. You've used up all your coins. We're trying to get some other people in here. Do we want to
go buy some more?
Yes, you're gonna have to go re-up your player card there at the kiosk. Go Bosky, interesting. If he makes the playoffs, we're talking about Will Johnson and his turf toe. Yeah, I don't know what the situation is there. I don't know if we're going to see him for the rest of the year. Seems to be week to week. Sharon Moore is saying he's working through it. If he
plays again, it won't be this weekend. It'll be Ohio State if he plays.
I know, but wouldn't you want to have one game back before that?
I would.
If you're looking at and I appreciate what Colston Loveland said, wanting to finish out the season and doing it because of what Michigan has done for him, for his family, for his brothers, for his guys. It is nice to hear that there is an obligation that these players feel to finish out what they started here. But if you do get injured and you are sort of trying to work yourself back into playing, and you are Will Johnson, and you are going to be a first-round draft pick, what is it that you're working yourself back to? And really the only thing left on this schedule that if you're Will Johnson is worth coming back for is the opportunity to play in Columbus in the shoe one more time and try to shock the world. And I think that if you are a competitor, if you are elite, if you are that dude, if you do have that dog in you, then yeah, I think that can be enough to entice you to come back on the field. But is it enough to potentially want to risk millions of dollars and the difference between being a first rounder and a second rounder? I'm not exactly sure. So Trent, if you were a betting man, do you think we see Will Johnson back on the field this year?
You know what? I do. I think he'll play against Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be hard to look. They're going to need him against Ohio State. Ohio State has NFL wide receivers all over the place. They are going to need Will Johnson against Ohio State, and so I think if he's healthy and if he feels like he can do it, I think we'll see him. But yeah, we're running out of time. When was the last game he played?
He left against Illinois.
Yeah, man, that Illinois game, that feels like,
yeah,
Jesus coming. Listen, Michigan, at least this year, does not have a good history of looking good coming out of the bye week. And so this game against Northwestern is just critical. And I called it a must-win game. People were like, it's not a must-win game. It doesn't matter. Like, who cares if they go to a bowl game? I'm telling you right now, if you win this game, you put yourself in bowl game. You've qualified for a bowl game, and there's the potential to reach 8 wins. I'm not saying you're going to do it, but how different is 8-5 potentially versus 5-7, right? That's a big 8-5 with a bowl game win versus 5-7 and no. I mean, ask the folks in East Lansing. They know what 5-7 feels like without qualifying for a bowl game. They've done that like the last 2 seasons. Feels like shit. So for Sharon Moore, there is a lot of incentive to try to get this team to a bowl game, and really that means you have got to beat Northwestern, and you've got to look way better coming out of this bye week than you looked against Illinois, because that was a flat out disaster. Matter of fact, I think that's probably the worst Michigan has looked all season long when they had extra time to prepare. Which
I agree.
And you got to go back to coaching on that one.
Yeah, you have all that time for scripted drives, and Michigan comes out and goes 3 and out. Like what? Like what's going on here?
3 and out, fumble, interception. Like what? That was just that was a wild game. That was
all that time to practice that.
Matt Kirby says Motor City Bowl. Yeah, I mean, look, if they're going to go bowling, keep them right here in Detroit. I would be totally fine with that for selfish reasons. Let's see. We're here at 55 minutes, Trent. We're going to end with this. I want to ask you a question. Okay. And this is something that I've thought about, and I've been looking at the schedule. And, maybe it is going to be an easy answer. But do you think, and I'm curious about, I'm pretty sure where this is going to go in the comments as well. But when looking at Michigan at 5-5 on the season, let me pull up the question here. Is Michigan closer in your mind, given what you've seen? Are they closer to being better than 5-5 right now? Or are they closer to being worse than 5-5 right now, based on what you've seen through 10 weeks? Do you think they're closer to being better or closer to being worse than 5-5?
Let me start off by saying I think you could make an argument that Michigan could have 2 more wins than they do right now. And they could also probably have 2 or 3 more losses than they do right now. Overall,
let me ask you, where are those? So where do you think the wins are? The potential wins versus the potential losses?
Well, I think they could have beaten Washington, Illinois, and Indiana. Like they could have beaten all of those teams, honestly.
Yeah, all winnable.
And then loss-wise, USC, obviously. They could have lost to USC. Yep. Minnesota, maybe. Yeah. So when you're looking at it like that, but overall, I think they're closer to being better, especially with what I believe Michigan's going to end up pulling in the transfer portal and in the recruiting class under Sharon Moore. Again, though, I keep going back to what does he do this offseason with coaches? Because if the same coaches return, I'm not confident Michigan's going to turn it around. But if he does the hard thing and you let these guys go and you bring in better talent, essentially, to surround yourself with, I think that the sky's the limit. But it's going to really depend on what Sharon Moore does as the head coach moving forward with his staff. Yeah, fair enough. And actually the responses in the comments went a little bit different than I thought. A lot of people think this team is closer to being better than 5-5 than they are to being worse. And I would agree. There's 3 games on the schedule that I think Michigan could have won if maybe the coaching staff was just a little more dialed in and the team was a little more dialed in. And you said it's Indiana, Illinois, and Washington. And that's the difference between, dude, you get those 3 wins. You're an 8-win team right now with 2 games left on the schedule. You're potentially putting yourself in the playoffs. You're probably not going to be making the conference championship, but you're in the playoff discussion at that point. And I think that Michigan was really close to doing that. And yeah, you had some players make some mistakes, and there's no question about it. But ultimately, in all of those games, when you look at Washington, Jed Fish, when you look at Illinois, Brett Bielema, when you look at Indiana with Kurt Cignetti, they outcoached Sharon Moore and his staff. They just flat out did. And when you look at on paper, the rosters, and you compare Michigan to those 3 teams, Michigan is more talented than all of them, but they didn't have the coaching to get it done. And so for that reason, I would say Michigan is closer to being better than 5-5, but the margins are thin when you do have a game manager at quarterback and you do have questionable play calling, and that's how you get to 5-5. Yeah. to be quite frank with you, I would say Butch Jones and Arkansas State outcoached Michigan.
Well,
Michigan had superior talent where it didn't end up looking like it. But I mean, coaching wise, Arkansas State played Michigan much tougher than what it should have.
I mean, did PJ Fleck and his staff outcoach Michigan? They were right there in the end.
Yeah.
You know, they sure as hell did in the second half. I mean, and that's it's odd. You'd have to go through. I mean, we should go through game by game and try to figure out, like, you know, was it just because Michigan was that much more talented on the field that coaching really wasn't going to matter? Because I think a lot of this has come down to coaching. I mean, we haven't seen the dominance from Michigan that we have come to expect. We haven't seen the execution, the discipline, none of that. And I think really all of that goes back to coaching. And so once again, that's not all entirely on Sharon Moore's feet, but when you surround yourself with a guy who has practically no experience as an offensive coordinator and a guy who hasn't been a DC at the college level in 20 years, I mean, dude, think about how much things have changed in college football in 20 years. Like, that was a long, long time ago. I just think Sharon Moore needs a better support staff around him as a first and heading into his second year as a head coach. He's just going to need those guys that are, you know, not, you know, at the top of their game, near the top of their game, and they've been doing it at the collegiate level for a long time. Question is he A, going to make the decision to go out and get those guys, and B, can he bring them to Ann Arbor? And that's going to be one of the things to really keep your eye on, along with the quarterback stuff. So another fan-led Wednesday, Trent, in the books. I can't believe we made it through it. I was certain the show was going to suck, and maybe it did. I'll figure it out on the replay when I go. I always look. I'm like the players and the coaches. I go back and watch game film on Trent and I, and then I text him about things he should have improved on and done better on, and I will do that this afternoon. We will be back on Friday with our game predictions, talk a little bit of Northwestern. Until then, get away from the computers, get away from your phone, protect your mental health. We'll see you on Friday.